Imagine a situation, which I'm sure is familiar to you. You're working on your laptop, and there is a notification popping on the screen. A letter from an HR. You had an interview with them a week ago, and now they're sending you an offer. You're happy for sure. Well, you've just been offered a job, but you also have a problem to solve. The thing is, there are other companies that you're expecting a reply from, and you'd rather take an offer from one of those. But you don't know yet if this offer will ever come. So you have to win yourself some time by not replying immediately, in case an HR from one of those companies writes back to you. Meanwhile, the HR who did write to you with an actual offer will not wait forever. They have two options, either to start contacting other candidates or to hire you. They give you a week to decide. So you have a hard decision to make without the luxury of being fully informed. Yeah, been there, done that. But it's not only our headache. This is actually a legit subject of scientific research, game theory, and economics. And one day, when a bunch of economists were working to solve a similar puzzle, they began to save lives. Yeah, they made an actual revolution in transplantology. Hi, and welcome to Control Shift, a podcast by Libo Studio and Humbleteam. My name is Anatoly Gromov, and I'm your host. In this podcast, we discuss stories of professionals from different spheres, their shifts, and most importantly, the difference they make in the world. And this time, I'm going to tell you how a shift in perspective can help you solve a seemingly unsolvable problem. We'll talk medicine, we'll talk marriages, we'll do a bit of math, and we'll even talk to a Nobel Prize winner. Let's get to it. So, what do our everyday problems like landing a dream job have to do with science? Well, game theory studies complicated situations where players' decisions and outcomes are interdependable. That's called strategic interactions. And the job situation we've described definitely calls for a strategy. Okay, sure, but is that really a matter of economics? Yes. Basically, from a typical economics perspective, this situation is a market. Economists are like that, they generally look at everything as a market. But these kind of situations are not, well, an ordinary market. They are ruled not by money, but by the preferences of both sides involved. Let's talk about those kind of markets a little more, because that's something we will be focusing on today. Say you come into a store to buy apples. You pick the ones you like best. The apples, of course, have no say in it, no one asks them. So the primary factor here is the price, your readiness to pay it, and the seller's readiness to sell for it. But some goods are not as passive as apples. Let's go back to the situation we began with. Employers and job seekers are choosing each other. You are the good here. But you're not that simple to buy. Paying money is not enough. You also need to be provided with a hefty bonus, nice coworkers, and a ping pong table, right? Same, for example, with higher education. You can't just buy a diploma and have it delivered to your doorstep. The school also should want you. If they both see each other as a perfect fit, it's a match. And a market that is built on matches is called a matching market. In the beginning of 1960s, two mathematicians named Lloyd Shapley and David Gale turned their attention to matching markets. They were the first to recognize them as a subject of game theory. The scientists' interest was purely academic, but they decided to add a little fun to it. The market they chose as an example was building a happy family. In fact, that's exactly how this math problem went down in history, as the stable marriage problem. But I'll tell you right away that this model was built with a heterosexual, monogamous pair in mind. There are strictly two clusters, men and women, and they have to choose only one person of the opposite sex as their partner. Money, as you can imagine, is not involved. You cannot just buy yourself a husband at the corner store, but what matters is preferences, meaning this is a classical matching market exercise. You might think that this is somewhat cynical to equate family and markets. Well, in science, it's not. Especially given that this cold-hearted math will eventually help to save lives. But that'll happen only decades later. For now, let's go back to romance. So, a little bit of math. We have men on the market. Men have different tastes in women. For example, David would die to marry Anna, and if she says no, he'll go to Pat and then to Cecile. That's his next pick. So we can literally rank David's picks like A, B, C, starting from the woman he likes the most, Anna. The same works for every other man in the group. There are women on the market, too. And they also have their preferences when it comes to men. So we can get that kind of rank list from each woman, too. Let's imagine we have 3 men and 3 women. Now all of them are thinking how to marry the perfect way. Perfect meaning that in the end there are 3 stable marriages where no one cheats. Imagine, David is head over heels in love with Anna, but she's married to someone else. At the same time, hold on, she dreamingly looks at David, who tops her current husband on her ranking list. This is so wrong. Clearly David and Anna are supposed to be together, but somehow they are married to different people. So back to math. Gale and Shapley, they believed every group of people, no matter the size, no matter the combination of preferences, every group can be intermarried into a stable, happily ever after. And like all normal mathematicians do, they started working on an algorithm. And they did create one. Following every step of it, one can bring the market to a stable equilibrium, with no cheating. Right now, I won't delve into details about how it works. Hope you don't mind. You'll have to trust me on this one. And I will tell you this much. It has limited steps and does not require a PhD to understand. For those who are curious to see how it works, I'll talk about it in the end of this episode. You'll need a pen and a piece of paper, so class, be ready. And for now, let's congratulate the happy couples. Well, it sounds almost too good to be true, right? Precise calculations, happy families, a dream coming to life. But looks like we'd lost the way. Weren't we headed towards saving lives and a revolution in transplantology? I promise you we'll get there. We just took a detour to have a look at the mathematical tool that started an incredible chain of events. It was not instant though. As it frequently happens, especially with highbrow math stuff, no one really understood what it was good for. And the algorithm remained a thing in itself, an elegant idea to toy with in a close circle of scientists. More than 10 years have passed since Gale and Shapley's article came out. It's the mid-70s now. On the other side of the country, a young economist scholar, Alvin Roth, works in the University of Illinois. He studies matching markets and, virtually by chance, comes across a curious case.
I don't remember exactly when I first saw it, but I remember when I was first interested in it. It was after I had moved to the University of Illinois in 1974, and I heard about how American doctors get their first jobs. And I realized that that was a problem much like the one that Gale and Shapley had spoken about in their article. So then I read it with great interest.
This is Alvin Roth himself. He's telling us how he discovered that 10 years before Gale and Shapley's article, with no prior knowledge about mathematical models, American hospitals were already applying something very much resembling the algorithm. So there was this National Resident Matching Program, an RMP, that helped residents find a hospital that would hire them. This is the same kind of market we've already discussed multiple times. There are hospitals looking for staff, there are med school graduates looking for a job, and the program takes their preferences into account and brings them together. Of course, Roth was surprised to say the least. What a coincidence! Something that scientists were working on and so far seeing as completely theoretical had been already applied in practice. Impressed by the discovery he made, Roth decided to stick with this market for a bit. In 1995, just some 20 years later, Roth got a call from the head of NRMP. He asked Roth for help. Many participants were not happy with the appointments made by the algorithm. For example, it did not take into consideration geographical preferences, like if someone wants to work close to their families and stuff. Roth remembers that this call came as a complete surprise.
So that was an important phone call for me, because when I picked up the phone and he asked if I would study the design and direct a redesign, I was a little sorry to have picked up the phone, because I felt, just as you ask, why did he call me? But the reason he called me is I had written a book with Marilda Sotomayor on matching, and I had written papers about the medical match. So I was the right person to call. But the book was a mostly mathematical book. And when it reached a difficult problem, it was enough to say, this is a difficult problem, not like the easy problems we have already solved. And I understood that if I said yes, then these difficult problems would be problems I would have to solve instead of just looking at.
Upscaling the algorithm took about 2 years, and the new version that met greater requirements was launched in 1997. It has been used in NRMP ever since. Please note, 2 decades have passed since Roth first started to study this case, and finally, he was able to put theory into practice. You might have thought, aha, so now we get to the medical stuff, saving lives and all, and that would be a full start. Not just yet, but we're almost there. And for now, let's jot something down. It was the first not theoretical, not experimental, but a real-life attempt to design a market that Roth made. He continued to hone this skill. For example, New York City had a system for matching students with schools, and it also needed an upgrade. All this work brought him closer to the realization that in designing markets, an economist is basically acting as an engineer. He has specific requirements, he studies the sophisticated machinery of the market, he gets to know its actors, and in the end builds a functioning mechanism. Alvin Roth was working outside of the mainstream. His scientific approach was truly revolutionary. For him, though, it came quite naturally.
So my background was a little unusual for an economist, because I didn't study economics. I was educated as an engineer. My PhD is in operations research. And I was interested in building things, which requires knowing about the details. And a lot of the existing economics didn't talk about the details. They talked about there exist prices that will make everything work, and somehow the market will find them. So maybe I took more of an engineering approach than was common in economics at that time.
Turning an abstract stable marriage problem into something practical and real was quite a monumental shift. And we think that deserves a formal recognition. Alvin Roth recognized that Shapley's theoretical results could clarify the functioning of the important markets in practice. In a series of empirical studies, Roth and his colleagues demonstrated that stability is the key to understanding the success of particular market institutions. He also helped redesign existing institutions for matching new doctors with hospitals and students with schools. These reforms are all based on the Gale-Shapley algorithm, along with modifications that take into account specific circumstances and ethical restrictions, such as preclusion of side payments. Do you know where this excerpt comes from? A Nobel Prize ceremony. Roth shared the most prestigious scientific prize with Lloyd Shapley, one of the co-creators of the algorithm, though they never worked together. The latter came up with the initial idea, and the former perfected it and applied it to a real market. But I have a confession to make. I was not being completely honest with you. I deliberately left out the most intriguing part from this speech. In fact, it mentioned one more market for matching organ donors with patients. So finally, the chapter where economics saves lives begins. No one looked at kidney transplants as a matching market issue before Alvin Roth. Moreover, he himself pointed that out entirely by accident. At one of his lectures, he needed a specific case for purely illustrative purposes. When students criticized the examples he used, Roth, without much thinking, said literally the first thing that came to his mind. Kidneys. Well, to be exact, it was inspired by the context. The class took place at the University of Pittsburgh, and nearby was a large transplantology center. So, Roth goes, here's a good that you can't, because you are legally prohibited to, sell. And this is obviously a matching market because, based on a list of medical factors, the kidney has to be a perfect match. Let's imagine a scenario. You have a spouse who suffers from kidney failure. They can either live on dialysis for years or try to get a new kidney. The first option is to wait for a deceased donor kidney transplant. That is, if someone dies but their kidneys are still okay. In that case, there's a 12-hour gap to perform the surgery. Of course, this would require consent from the relatives of the deceased donor, as well as blood type compatibility, tissue compatibility, etc., etc., etc. These kind of surgeries are extremely rare. And as a result, in the US alone, there are 100,000 people on the waiting list for a kidney. Okay, there is a second option where you don't want to wait for someone to die. A living donor kidney transplant. Usually, there is a relative who is ready to help. So you say, dear spouse, take my kidney. But there is a but. Matching still plays a key role. Your kidney has to fit. By the early 2000s, less than 20 people a year were getting a living donor transplant. Long story short, the situation is dire. Either you're extremely lucky or you wait in a 100K line and live on dialysis for years. All in all, you get the picture. But there is good news as well. Back in the mid-90s, the medics came up with a brilliant idea: cross-donating. After all, the law does not prohibit transplants from non-relatives. So, let's imagine one more scenario. Now there is another couple like you and your spouse. The patient's partner would be happy to donate too, but snap, they're not a compatible match. However, your healthy kidney suits the patient from the other pair, and vice versa. That's when we connect you with them, perform cross surgeries, and bam, everyone has a kidney. And again, doctors did it without asking the economists. In the beginning of the 2000s, there was even a triple transplant performed. And in Romania, a 4-couple exchange happened. There was still a practical problem though. The doctors didn't know the exact number of people who were ready to cross-donate, and they knew nothing about their location and what their health conditions were. In other words, there was no way to manage it and take it to a bigger scale. At the same time, the following is true. First, mathematicians can find any kind of matches, however complicated. Second, economists have been already putting it into practice. But the doctors, of course, are not obliged to read papers on the cutting-edge economic research. Luckily, economists do read the news. Alvin Roth was inspired by the first cross-donor transplant performed in the US. It happened a couple years after the incident in the class, when he looked out the window and wondered about kidneys for the first time.
So I started to talk about kidney exchange before I thought it could be a real thing. I had no particular belief that it was going to turn into a practical market. But in 1998, I moved to Boston, and the first kidney exchange in the United States was performed a year or two later nearby at the Rhode Island hospital. And it was in the newspaper. And I realized I had notes in my class notes on kidney exchange, and that instead of waiting for patients to fortuitously be at the same hospital and be able to exchange, we could treat it like a centralized clearinghouse. We could find a marketplace to help organize these in an efficient. And that's how my work on kidney exchange began. And I worked with two colleagues, Typhoon Sunmez and Utku Unver, and we sent our paper to lots of kidney surgeons, but only one answered, and that was Frank Delmonico. And we helped him form the New England program for kidney exchange. And since then, kidney exchange has spread around the United States and around the world, although slowly. We're still working on helping kidney patients get transplants.
I like how nonchalantly Professor Roth speaks about the happily ever after part. He goes like, since then, kidney exchange has spread around, a definition of a happy ending. And of course it is, but it wasn't as fast and easy as he makes it sound. Both economists and doctors working on the matching system were to face many challenges on their way. Both sides had to cooperate closely and intensely. They had to create a database to which the doctors would add patients that needed a transplant. The database would be used to find optimal matches by means of the algorithm. And clearly, the algorithm would have to include new factors that were specific to the kidney market. And economists and doctors were going in basically blind. They were learning what aspects should be integrated while they were already elbows deep in the work.
I spent a lot of my time with kidney surgeons and with people who study immunology. And some of it was learning to speak their language and learning how to speak to them about our language. So, for instance, very early on, they said to us, you talk about people as having preferences for kidneys, but that's wrong. A kidney either works or it doesn't. It's either compatible or incompatible. So we made a model to help them organize kidney exchange between pairs in which kidneys were either compatible or incompatible. But then they would send us the data of the patients de-identified. So we would produce a match and we would go show it to them. And they would open up the patient's charts. They'd say, well, donor 1 is a small woman and patient 2 is a big man. Will it work? Is she big enough? And they'd say, yeah, it'll work. And so they thought they were just deciding compatible or incompatible, but we were noticing that some kidneys are more compatible than others. It depends on the size of the donor and the size of the recipient. And so we explained to them that we could help them better decide matches if they would tell us that kind of information, since they cared about it. And so we had many discussions of that sort where we learned from them and they learned from us.
And this is how new nuances no one could have predicted came up. The whole idea behind the algorithm was that it would find the best possible matches. Not just, okay, this is a matching kidney, very well, we'll take it. It would be beneficial to also know if there were any other matching kidneys, maybe even more suitable for the transplant. In this case, the more options we are choosing from, the better. That's why the work wasn't quite linear. When a new factor came about, researchers had to take a few steps back and start again. And then there might have been a mistake or a miscalculation or a new factor that kicked in. If so, congratulations, yet another round. So in a way, it was an endless circle of tests. As a designer who had his share of clients giving endless rounds of feedback after each iteration, I completely understand the pain. There was another difficulty on the way. In the beginning, the doctors would only agree for a 2-couple transplant. Although, as I've mentioned multiple times, the algorithm would allow for any number of transplantations. Because even like this, it was a complicated medical procedure to perform. You see, it involves 4 people, 2 donors and 2 recipients. So in 4 ORs, everything has to go smoothly. Moreover, all this has to happen at the same time. Yeah, such an exchange calls for simultaneity, and not a necessary condition. Why is that? Because someone might bail. It's a legal issue. You can't just sign a paper saying, I hereby oblige to give my kidney to your husband, which will happen 1 week after you give yours to my wife. So even when surgeries happen in different states, all surgeons have to get on the phone, make sure that every participant is under anesthesia and everything goes as planned, and only then proceed with the first cut. It took a lot of time for Roth and his team to convince the doctors to perform a triple transplant, and then even larger exchanges. But again, however large it is, timing still remains the critical factor. The surgeries need to be performed within a short time window, and that is always a risk. But along with cross donation, so-called paired exchange, there are also open chains of donations. And here, simultaneity is not a prerequisite. For example, in 2012, a young Californian just came up to the hospital and volunteered to donate his kidney without asking for anything in return. The recipient of his kidney has freed up his prospective donor, and he in return gave his kidney to someone else, and so on and so on. So this young man started a life-saving chain of transplantations that in the end saved not 1 but 30 lives. This chain turned out to be so long because coordination and matching was possible, thanks to the created database and the algorithm. And it just so happened that 2012 was also the year when Alvin Roth and Lloyd Shapley were awarded the Nobel Prize. It took half a century for math to inspire economics, which eventually led to saving lives. You might think, wow, what an inspiring story. But at the same time, for you, it might sound not so relevant, provided you don't have any kidney issues or you're not a young doctor seeking employment. Well, that's not exactly true. The Gale-Shapley algorithm affects you directly, right now as we speak. The thing is, the matches between internet servers and users are powered by an algorithm. Among hundreds of thousands of servers, a user prefers the one that provides a faster response. And the server, in turn, opts for a less energy-consuming connection. As you can see, it is a classic matching market with preferences on both sides. So, while you are listening to this podcast, billions of mathematical calculations are happening at each fraction of time. They are finding the perfect option to ensure you hear the end of the story. And all these calculations and matchings are based on the algorithm. So basically every second you are being a part of a large-scale stable marriage, including millions of future husbands and wives. And one can, or can't, imagine how many applications this algorithm can have. But of course someone has to help them become implemented. Someone who has the ability to shift perspective in order to discover new, non-obvious ways to employ its features, or even its core. And I have a very practical story just about that. So there is this startup called Nexar. Its first product was a very simple DVR that came with a very simple navigator. These were ancient times, so it worked. But the success wasn't as lasting as they hoped. They were pushed out of market by, on the one hand, big tech companies like Apple and Google that had endless resources to develop and improve their products, and on the other, Chinese manufacturers that could do the same but cheaper. So Nexar started thinking, what can they do to make their product stand out? 2 heads are better than 1, and hundreds of young and eager heads are even better. Nexar ran dozens of university-based AI hackathons. They gave undergrad coders tasks such as, we've recorded 5 gigabytes of cyclists cycling at night. The prize goes to a participant who can detect and identify nocturnal cyclists with the greatest accuracy. Or nocturnal school buses. Or nocturnal car crashes. Or just school buses and car crashes. I mean, you get the idea. So when Nexar asked Humbleteam for help, they had the best coders that they hunted during these hackathons, and great software algorithms that could detect and identify almost everything, you name it. But they had no idea what to do with that. My guess is that you don't need a DVR or a navigator to tell you that the light is green or that the vehicle in front of you is a school bus. You cannot see it for yourself. And surely you won't pay for it. Long story short, now Nexar has a product with great traction. If you're a Nexar client and God forbid you got in an accident, you just need to press report button and that's it. You can get out of the car and continue with your day. When insurance agents arrive, they will get a detailed report from the AI and all the proof they need from the DVR. Genius, right? And Humbleteam helped with that. It was not a finger-snap revelation though. They did not just look out of the window and suddenly knew what to do. In a span of 2 months, Humbleteam helped Nexar to come up with several hypotheses, developed sample designs and tested them. That's their job. That's what designers/business consultants are here for. And I have plenty of stories like that. As you can see, if we ignore all marriages, game theory, kidneys, and Nobel Prize ceremonies, it turns out that we are surrounded by similar cases of reinvention, of great instruments being applied cleverly. But of course we at Control Shift are not going to ignore that. It's much more interesting this way, don't you think? So, any of you still want to learn how the algorithm works and learn how to match those seeking love? To be honest, the algorithm is fairly simple, which makes it even more admirable. So, here's the instruction for our most patient and curious listeners. Like I said, you'll need a pen and a piece of paper. Let's get right to it. Let's take 3 women: Anna, Beth, and Cecile. So, A, B, and C. And then the men, David, Ethan, and Frank, which would stand for D, E, and F. Each participant has a preference-based rating, but they keep this information to themselves. Let's put them into 2 columns. It'll be easier if you write it down. The first column, preferences of women. We write down A, F, D, E, because Anna likes Frank the most, then David, and then also Ethan. Then we write B, F, E, D, meaning Beth likes Frank, then Ethan, and then David. Then C, D, E, F. These are the preferences of Cecile. The second column is the same but for men. D, A, C, B. Then E, C, B, A. And lastly, F, A, B, and C. Each man proposes to the first woman on his list. Let's say, just to illustrate his liking, he sends her flowers. David likes Anna most of all. Look at his preferences, they are A, C, B. So Anna gets his bouquet. Let's draw a little flower in the first column, where Anna's preferences are near the letter D. Anna is also a favorite of Frank's. His preferences start with A too, so she gets another bouquet. Another little flower in the same row, but this time near the letter F. Each man makes the first pass. Hence, Ethan sends flowers to Cecile in order to show his feelings, another flower, but in the row C near letter E. Beth hasn't been proposed to yet. She's no one's first choice, so no flowers in a row. But that will be resolved soon, no worries. Every woman responds with a maybe, that's important. Not a yes, but a maybe. So every woman awards her fan she likes the most with a maybe, and says no to all the other candidates, and sends their bouquets back. Beth received no flowers, Cecile only received a bouquet from Ethan and holds on to it. And Anna is the only one who has the luxury of choice. She'd been sent flowers twice. She looks at her own list and says, okay, I like Frank more than David, then I keep Frank's bouquet and send David's back. Let's cross out the flower near D. David is a gentleman, so he knows that no means no and won't propose to Anne again. Let's cross out letter A near David's preferences. So, David has to make the next step. Cecile is next on his list after Anna. He sends his flowers to her, so we draw a new flower in the row C near letter D. Now Cecile is twice a prospective bride and has to make a choice. She looks at her list. David is first, and Ethan is placed second. And in that case, she's happy about the recent turn of events and returns the first bouquet to Ethan. We cross out his flower in Cecile's row. And consequently, we cross out letter C in Ethan's list of preferences. So Ethan has to make a move while the other men wait. Bet is next on Ethan's list, so he sends his flowers to her. Let's finally draw the first flower in a row B near Ethan. Bet accepts his bouquet. She's not exactly in a position to choose. Ethan is second on her list, not the first, but that's good enough. What matters is that he is on the list and he is a candidate. Everything is fine. We see that in the first column there is one flower in every row. You can let go of your pen now. So at this point the algorithm has fulfilled its mission. There are 3 stable couples. And why do we call them stable? Let's look again at our columns. Bet would prefer Frank to her fiancé Ethan. But Frank won't run away with her because he's with the woman he likes the most, with Anna. And then the same goes for every couple. The algorithm allowed us to find 3 perfect couples in just 3 steps. If you want to double check, you can change the preferences however you want and see it for yourself. Or you can take 4 men and 4 women, 10, 50, 300. I guarantee you that it's gonna work every time like a charm. So huzzah! Glory to mathematics, the queen of the sciences. I wish you all the love in the world, no kidney or any other organ issues whatsoever, and yes, don't miss out on our next episode. Control-Shift was brought to you by Libo Studio and Humbleteam. Music for this episode was created by Kira Weinstein, and also special thanks to Blue Dot Session. We got a whole lot of people working on this podcast. Credits to all of them are in the description of the episode. And I am your host, Anatoly Gromov. See you in the next one.